Picture this. You're sitting in your car, headlights off, parked outside her building at 2 in the morning. The streets are silent, but your mind is anything but. You've been staring at your phone for hours, hoping for a reply to the message you sent at dinner. 6 hours later, nothing. You scroll through old conversations, looking for reassurance, replaying her last words, scanning for some hidden clue you missed. Your chest feels like it's shrinking. Your thoughts are racing in circles. And deep down, you know that the moment you press send again, you'll cross that invisible line from interested to desperate. This isn't the first time you've been here. In fact, you've been here so many times it almost feels like home. Different faces, different names, but the same gnawing fear that the silence means you've already lost. It's the same story men across the world repeat, even those who seem to have it all. One man I spoke with was successful by every measure. Wealth, looks, status. Yet when the woman he adored pulled back, he spiraled into sleepless nights, frantic texts, and the same crushing panic you feel. No amount of money or status could shield him from that sickening sense of powerlessness. That's because the real wound wasn't her silence. It was what her silence awakened in him. The story is mine told. I'm not enough. I always lose. I'll be alone. Most men promise themselves that next time will be different. They tell themselves they'll be stronger, colder, more in control. But let me tell you something hard to accept. The issue isn't that she's playing a game. The issue is that you keep showing up to play it. You've handed over the keys to your emotional state, and you don't even realize it. Many men secretly believe they can armor themselves against this pain by controlling how women respond to them. They chase a formula. If they become attractive enough, successful enough, clever enough, or mysterious enough, they imagine they can secure love and loyalty. But this belief is a trap. It builds a prison where your happiness hangs on someone else's mood. You end up living like a hostage to every text notification, every change in her tone, every flicker of interest or disinterest on her face. The Roman philosopher Epictetus once said, "We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from the stories we tell ourselves about them." Think about that. It's not the unanswered text that destroys you. It's the meaning you attach to it. It's not the breakup itself that devastates you. It's the story you whisper to yourself at night. I'm not worthy. I'll never find love again. When your entire sense of worth depends on signals outside your control, you set yourself up for endless torment. You start micromanaging every word you say, every emoji you send, every pause before you respond. You become an actor in your own life, rewriting lines to please an audience that may or may not clap. And the cruel irony is this: the harder you try to control, the more powerless you become. Your desperation leaks through every gesture, and she feels it before you even realize it. What you think will secure her interest only pushes her further away. Here is the brutal truth few men want to hear. You cannot dictate how anyone treats you. You cannot force someone to stay. You cannot guarantee loyalty, affection, or permanence. No matter how much effort you pour in, the harder you cling, the more fragile you become, the harder you perform, the less authentic you appear. And women, especially women, sense that weakness instantly. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with only one domain of true power: your own thoughts, your own choices, your own interpretations. When she doesn't answer, you cannot control whether she picks up her phone, but you can control whether you interpret that silence as a dagger to your worth or simply as information. When she chooses someone else, you cannot control her preference, but you can control whether you tell yourself the story that you failed or the story that she's shown you who she truly is. This shift sounds simple, but it's everything. Because once you see that your suffering is born not from her actions, but from your interpretation of those actions, you realize where the battlefield really lies, not in her words or silences, not in the dance of attraction, but in the inner terrain you've been avoiding all your life. I want you to pause here and reflect on something. How many times in your life have you thought a rejection was about you, when in reality, it was simply about her path, her wounds, her choices? How many nights have you bled over stories that were never even true to begin with? Think about that, because the fight isn't out there. It's much closer. It's in the unconscious programming you carry. The old wounds, the unresolved fears, the stories you absorbed long before you even knew you were absorbing them. And until you step into that battlefield, every rejection will reopen the same scars. And here's the cliffhanger. What if I told you that every panic attack, every sleepless night, every unanswered text is actually a message from your own unconscious mind, pulling the strings without your awareness? To understand why women have the power to wound you so deeply, you have to understand the hidden forces inside yourself. That's where we're going next. Every man thinks the pain comes from her. The unanswered calls, the sudden distance, the way she seemed so present one day and vanished the next. But if you look closer, you'll notice something deeper. The real weight doesn't come from what she did. It comes from what her actions triggered inside you. That sick feeling in your gut, that racing mind. It's not just about her. It's about every wound you've been carrying long before she arrived. The truth is, women often act as mirrors for the parts of yourself you've tried hardest to bury. A woman withdrawing might remind you of a mother who was distant or critical. A cold shoulder might stir memories of schoolyard humiliation. A breakup might awaken the same emptiness you felt as a child when no one came to comfort you. The present rejection feels unbearable because it reopens old scars you never healed. I once knew a man who could not handle the smallest sign of disinterest. A delayed reply, a change in tone, a cancelled plan. It would send him spiraling. On the surface, he seemed strong, but each rejection shattered him as if it was proof of his unworthiness. After years of repeating the same cycle, he finally uncovered the root, a childhood where love was always conditional. He learned early that he had to perform to be noticed, to be pleasing to be loved. So as an adult, every time a woman pulled back, he relived that same terror of not being enough. Psychology calls these patterns defense mechanisms. Maybe you've used them too without realizing it. Some men withdraw emotionally at the first sign of danger. Others overcompensate, showering women with gifts, attention, and flattery. Some swing to aggression, anger as a mask for fear. These strategies once helped you survive, but in adult life, they sabotage your relationships. They make you react far bigger than the situation calls for, and they push you to behave in ways that betray your true intentions. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's what most men do. They repeat the same story with different women, convinced that each one is the problem, when in fact, they are reliving their own unhealed wounds over and over. The woman is not the cause, she's the trigger. The cause is the unresolved pain sitting in the basement of your mind. This is where the idea of the persona enters. The persona is the mask you wear to convince the world and yourself that you've got it all together. You put on confidence, charm, and control, while underneath you're terrified of rejection. You tell yourself you're unbothered, but the moment she pulls away, your chest tightens and your mask starts to crack. The persona might fool others for a while, but it never fools you. And when the mask slips, the collapse feels even worse. Take the story of another man I knew. He was a high achiever, respected at work, admired by friends, always confident in social circle. But every time a relationship ended, he collapsed in private. He admitted once, I can handle losing a job easier than losing a woman. Why? Because his professional mask couldn't hide the fact that deep inside, he still believed he wasn't lovable without someone else's approval. His strength in public only highlighted the fragility of his private self. The way forward isn't to keep strengthening the mask. The mask is the problem. Real strength comes from integration. That means pulling the parts of yourself you've tried to exile, the needy parts, the insecure parts, the wounded child, and bringing them back into the light. It means saying to yourself, yes, I want love. Yes, rejection hurts. Yes, I sometimes feel afraid. And instead of treating those truths as weaknesses, you embrace them as part of being human. It sounds counterintuitive, but this kind of vulnerability is what makes you stronger. Because when you choose to face it consciously, it no longer controls you unconsciously. The need for validation becomes a conscious desire, not a compulsion. The fear of rejection becomes information, not paralysis. The moment you stop hiding from your shadow, it stops running your life from behind the curtain. But here's where most men fail. They think that if they just understand their wounds, the work is done. They read about trauma. They nod at quotes. They even talk about it with friends. Yet when the next woman pulls away, the same storm hits them just as hard. Why? Because understanding is not the same as transformation. Knowledge about your wounds doesn't heal them. You have to confront them directly. You have to feel the pain you've been avoiding. And this is the hardest step, because it means sitting with emotions that terrify you. It means reliving moments you'd rather forget. It means admitting that the strong, stoic mask you've built is not invincible. Most men run from this stage because the temptation to avoid pain is overwhelming. They'd rather numb themselves with distractions, bury themselves in work, or rush into the next relationship just to avoid feeling that emptiness. But as long as you avoid the pain, it owns you. I want you to reflect on something right now. Think back to the last time you felt rejected. Was the pain really about her? Or was it about something far older? Something that had been waiting in the shadows, using her behavior as a trigger to surface. Sit with that thought, because it might just be the first step to breaking the cycle. And here's the cliffhanger. Recognizing these wounds is only the beginning. To truly become immune, not just aware, you must take responsibility in a way that most men never do. The question is, what happens when you stop blaming her, stop blaming fate, and turn the spotlight fully onto yourself? That is where sovereignty begins. If the unconscious is the battlefield, sovereignty is the armor you build to walk through it unshaken. Most men never reach this stage because it requires something they spend their whole lives avoiding. Full responsibility. Responsibility not just for their actions, but for their inner world, their interpretations, their reactions, their patterns. This is where a man shifts from victim to master. When rejection happens, two men can face the same moment yet live entirely different realities. One collapses, drowning in shame, convinced he is unworthy. The other feels the sting, acknowledges it, and steadies himself, because he knows the meaning of the event is his to choose. The first man is enslaved to her behavior. The second man remains sovereign because he interprets through strength, not weakness. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." What he meant is simple. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. You cannot stop a woman from walking away, but you can decide whether her leaving defines your worth or simply redirects your path. This is what I call emotional sovereignty. It's not the absence of emotion. It's the ability to feel everything without being enslaved by anything. Loneliness, rejection, disappointment. All of these emotions will still visit you. But instead of reacting blindly, you treat them as information. Loneliness tells you that you need connection. Rejection reminds you of a wound to address. Disappointment points toward a misaligned expectation. They are signals, not shackles. I once knew a man who, after years of failed relationships, decided he would finally sit with his loneliness instead of rushing into the arms of the next woman who showed him attention. For months, he faced his evenings alone. He learned to cook for himself, to sit in silence without panic, to pour his energy into training his body and mind. At first it felt unbearable, but over time, that emptiness became space. Space where he could build strength, purpose, and self-respect. Months later, when he entered a new relationship, he no longer clung out of desperation. He chose out of abundance, and that's the paradox of sovereignty. The less you need women to complete you, the more attractive you become to the kind of women worth having. Not because you're playing a game of indifference, but because you've built a core that radiates stability. Desperation repels, self-possession draws. This masculine core is built through discipline. It is forged by pursuing goals that matter regardless of whether they win you female approval. When a man is rooted in purpose, whether in his career, in his art, in his training, or in service to others, he carries a gravity that cannot be faked. Women sense it, other men respect it, and most importantly, he respects himself. But sovereignty is not just about purpose, it's also about boundaries. Most men live with weak or reactive boundaries. They bend to avoid disapproval, tolerate disrespect just to keep a woman around, and betray their own standards in exchange for scraps of affection. This weakness does not preserve love. It poisons it. Every time you betray your own dignity to win someone's approval, you teach yourself that your worth is negotiable. Revolutionary boundaries, on the other hand, are not walls. They are doors. They signal clearly who may enter your life and under what conditions. When you identify your non-negotiables, dishonesty, disrespect, manipulation, and enforce them without exception, you send a message far louder than words. I value myself, and the right women will not only respect it, they will feel safer with you because of it. I recall a man who once described how he calmly ended a date after the woman mocked him in front of others. He didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't rage. He simply stood, paid the bill, and left. Days later, she reached out shocked, not because he was cruel, but because he was clear. She admitted she had tested him, and his refusal to tolerate disrespect awakened a respect in her she didn't expect. That's the power of boundaries rooted in sovereignty. At this point, you might feel a tension rising. You might be thinking, if I build this core, if I hold these boundaries, will I end up alone? Here is the truth most men refuse to face. Enforcing your standards will drive away women who intended to use you, and that's not a loss, it's liberation. The women who remain are those who are drawn to your authenticity and strength, not to your compliance. But sovereignty alone is not the end. It is the foundation to live truly free, to become untouchable by manipulation and rejection. You must go further. You must build independence in every arena of life where you once outsourced your strength. Emotional, social, financial, even sexual. Because the man who cannot stand alone will always cling to others, and clinging is the enemy of freedom. And this is where we go next. If sovereignty is the armor, independence is the fortress. It is what makes you unshakable, not only in love, but in life. Sovereignty gives you armor, but independence gives you a fortress. Too many men build their sense of self on shaky ground, leaning on women for validation, on relationships for identity, on others for fulfillment. The result is always the same: dependency, and dependency is the root of manipulation. A man who cannot stand alone is a man who will tolerate chains just to avoid solitude. Independence begins with the inner life. Emotional independence means you learn to regulate your own state instead of outsourcing it to her approval. It's the ability to comfort yourself when you're hurting, to motivate yourself when discouraged, to steady yourself when triggered. A man who can face his own storm without reaching for someone else's umbrella is a man no rejection can break. But independence doesn't stop there. Social independence means building bonds beyond romance, brotherhood with other men, genuine friendships, family ties, communities that ground you in shared values. When your social world is wide and rich, you don't chase intimacy out of desperation. You choose it out of freedom. Financial independence may seem obvious, but it is essential. A man dependent on a partner for his livelihood cannot stand tall in love. Money is not everything, but without the ability to support yourself, you become vulnerable to compromises that corrode respect. A financially stable man can walk away when respect is lost. That freedom changes everything. Domestic independence is often overlooked. Too many men enter relationships not for love, but for a caretaker. They seek someone to cook, to clean, to manage their lives. But true strength means being able to run your own household with competence and pride. A man who can care for himself attracts a partner out of choice, not out of necessity. Then comes recreational independence. The man who has passions, hobbies, And pursuits beyond romance is never empty. Whether it's martial arts, building something with your hands, hiking alone in nature, or creating art, these things fill the soul. They keep you grounded in who you are, not in who someone else thinks you should be. And yes, there is sexual independence too. It is controversial, but real. A man who cannot manage his sexual drive without desperation will always be vulnerable to manipulation. But when you learn to master yourself, when you no longer chase intimacy from a place of need, you begin to choose partners from strength, not compulsion. All of this independence creates one thing: freedom. And freedom creates clarity. When you no longer need a woman to feed your ego, entertain your loneliness, or rescue you from your own inner emptiness, you begin to see her behavior for what it is: information. Her silence is not abandonment, it is data. Her rejection is not devastation, it is direction. This is consciousness expansion, the ability to observe without being ruled. When you understand that her hot and cold signals are often just control strategies, you stop reacting like a puppet. When you recognize your own patterns before you fall into them, you cut the strings that used to bind you. You begin to see the difference between genuine femininity and performance, between connection and manipulation. And here's the paradox that every strong man eventually learns: the less you need her, the more attractive you become to women of quality. When you embody independence, when you radiate calm, strength, and purpose, you carry a gravity that draws the right people into your orbit. Not because you are playing games, but because authenticity is magnetic. The women who are only chasing validation will fall away. The women who value truth, depth, and partnership will remain. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." The man who has purpose, who stands firm in his why, cannot be undone by the fleeting whims of another. His life is not defined by a relationship, but enriched by it. Love becomes a choice, not a lifeline. Connection becomes an addition, not a crutch. Think back for a moment to all the nights you felt broken, convinced you would never recover from her leaving. And now imagine this, feeling that same sting, but watching yourself remain steady, grounded, whole. That is emotional immunity. That is freedom. And it is not built by avoiding women or closing your heart. It is built by healing what is within, by forging sovereignty, by cultivating independence. This doesn't mean you'll never feel sadness again. Disappointment will still visit. Rejection will still sting. But those emotions will no longer define you. They will come and go, like weather. While your core remains unshaken, you will still love, but not from need. You will still give, but not from emptiness. And you will still face loss, but never again collapse under it. Every woman who has ever hurt you was not your destroyer. She was your teacher. Each trigger was a map pointing you back to the parts of yourself you had abandoned. Each rejection was an invitation to stand taller, to return to your center, to become whole. When you see this clearly, you no longer curse your past. You thank it. Because the man who completes himself no longer fears being broken. And that is the man women respect, men admire, and life cannot shake. If you followed this path with me, through the prison of external validation, across the battlefield of the unconscious, into the armor of sovereignty, and now within the fortress of independence, then you already know the truth. No woman will ever hurt you again, not because rejection ceases to exist, but because you cease to collapse under it. Subscribe if you're ready to keep walking this path with me, not for tips or tricks, but for the kind of knowledge that builds unshakable men. Share this with a brother who needs it, because freedom is not meant to be hoarded, it's meant to be passed on. And remember this final truth: the difference between men who break and men who rise is simple. One seeks completion in others, the other completes himself.